Welcome to Understanding Human Anatomy and our discussion of the female pelvis and the viscera within it. In the last video, I left off with this diagram. You can see the uterus, part of the uterine tube, and the broad ligament. I will begin by drawing in the ovary, which sits on the posterior surface of the broad ligament. So let me draw the ovary on this side and then the other side. And we will color them in, and we'll put a label on at least one of them. There. Now, attaching to the ovary are two ligaments, so two on each side. One of these ligaments is called the suspensory ligament, and it runs from the broad ligament over to the ovary on each side. Now, this is a very important ligament because it is actually the mesentery of the ovary. It is carrying the ovary's vascular supply, nerve supply, and lymphatic supply. So it's critical for ovarian function. The other ligament runs from the ovary to the uterus, and it's called the Ovarian Ligament or the Utero-Ovarian Ligament. Let me draw it here. And it is just a connective tissue ligament that is a remnant of another structure called the gubernaculum. Then I want to draw in a ligament coming from the uterus and extending over to the deep inguinal ring. And this is the round ligament of the uterus. And this ligament passes through the inguinal canal and actually anchors itself in the floor of the labia majora. So let me sketch in the labels for these three ligaments. The suspensory ligament, and again, this is the mesentery of the ovary. The ovarian ligament and this is just a connective tissue mass here, and then the round ligament of the uterus. And we'll draw a line to it. There. Now that I have these structures drawn in, I can finish the uterine tube, because the uterine tube actually projects posteriorly. So it comes away from the broad ligament, like so. And it has an expanded area that then narrows down. And on the other side, we'll draw it in and then I will color it. And then the other side. There. And now that I've got the whole uterine tube drawn in on each side, we can start putting some more labels in. We have finger-like projections of the tube that move over towards the ovary, and these are the Fimbria. And draw a line to one of them here. And the Fimbria lead to an expanded area that's kind of funnel shaped. It starts out very wide and then narrows down. This is the Infundibulum. And we'll draw a line to the Infundibulum. And the Infundibulum leads to a wider area of the uterine tube, and this area is called the ampulla. And finally, the tube gets very narrow, and the very narrow part of the tube that connects to the uterus itself is the isthmus. And we'll draw a line to it. Now, there's only one more structure we need to sketch into this view, and that is the rectum. So let me sketch the rectum in surrounding the anal orifice. And we'll label the rectum. Now, that completes the pelvic viscera for the female. What I want to point out is that the cervix projects into an area of the vagina which is dilated. It is wider than the cervix. Now, I've exaggerated the difference, but it's still wider. And the area between the cervix and the vaginal wall is called the fundus. So what I want to do is draw a section that would cut through the cervix and vagina in a cross section, like so. And that will be the next slide. So what I want to do is start by drawing in the cervix. Draw it in like so, and the cervical canal will be here, and we'll fill it in to make it easier to see. So this is the cervix. The cervix of the uterus. Here. And then I'm going to sketch in the wall of the vagina. And there will be vagina that is directly applied to the cervix. Here. Like so. And then the vagina away from the cervix. Remember, I said that the vagina is dilated in the area of the cervix, so it's wider than the cervix. And this creates a gutter surrounding the cervix. And the gutter are named forniicies, and it's a continuous gutter, but we divide it into regions. There is an anterior fornix, in this region, a posterior fornix, and 2 lateral fornices. And I'll draw lines to the lateral fornices, like so. So this gutter completely surrounds the cervix, but is divided into anterior, posterior, and 2 lateral fornices. Now, in the last slide, I want to look at a sagittal section through the female pelvis so that we can look at the folds of peritoneum associated with the rectum, the uterus, and the urinary bladder. So that will be the next slide. So here is a midsagittal section through the female pelvis. And again, I've borrowed this from a previous diagram. And I'm going to draw in the peritoneum. This would be the floor of the peritoneum, and it's applied to the rectum, and then comes back over the posterior fornix and onto the uterus. Then over the uterus, down onto the bladder, and then up on the anterior body wall, like so. So this is the peritoneum in the floor of the abdominal pelvic cavity. Remember that in the male we had a pouch, the rectovesicular pouch. Well, the uterus and vagina get in the way of that pouch and divide it into 2 pouches. One is the rectouterine pouch, and I'll draw a line with an arrowhead down into it. And the rectouterine pouch is the low point of the peritoneal cavity in the female. And then we will have the uterovesicular pouch, and the uterovesicular pouch is between the uterus and the urinary bladder. And again, in this drawing, note that the uterus is anteverted over the urinary bladder. Notice that the posterior fornix of the vagina is in close relation to the rectouterine pouch. And that really it's only the thin wall of the vagina and the peritoneal membrane that separates the vaginal opening from the rectouterine pouch. Also notice that because the uterus is anteverted over the bladder, the uterus enters the vagina at almost a 90-degree angle to the direction of the vagina. So that if a foreign object is inserted into the vagina, as say instruments when doing an procedure in the uterus, and this commonly happened with abortions, if somebody wasn't trained in the anatomy, they would insert directly in and push the instrument through into the rectouterine pouch. It would tear this completely and the instrument would wind up in here. When that happens, that introduces bacteria from the vagina into the rectouterine pouch, and a case of peritonitis will result. A physician that knows the anatomy knows that the instruments have to be brought up to the cervix and then inserted at the angle through the cervix into the uterine cavity. That completes our discussion of the female viscera in the pelvic cavity. Thank you for your attention.